It's early September here in the garden and it's beginning to feel a little bit autumnal, and the focus and the energy has definitely shifted in this garden. But what I want to talk about is one of the biggest mistakes that I see especially beginner gardeners make, and it's to do with undercover growing. Because whilst it's slowing down and kind of ramping down a lot outside, there's so much that we can start doing undercover, be it in a cold frame or in a polytunnel, to get loads of harvest during winter and into the hungry gap. By the way, if you like this content and you want to support the work that we do on this channel and beyond, the easiest way to do that is to get your gardening supplies from our online garden centre, Hughes Garden. Right now in our polytunnels and greenhouses, we're very much enjoying the success of summer crops, you know, a snacking cucumber, loads of tomatoes. But the reality is, in maybe a month, 2 months, depending on how the season goes, all these will be out. The sweet corn will be out, everything will be out. And then we're left with bare ground. And one of the things that you never really want in a garden, for a truly healthy garden, is bare ground. And luckily, we can actually approach this to feed us by planting specific things that are going to benefit from being undercover and bring us a lot of really fresh food over the darkest of months. If you're growing tomatoes this year, one of the main things to actually do in early September, if you haven't already, like me, is to give them a bit of a prune. The really important thing for tomatoes is airflow, because if there's a lack of airflow, you can get stagnant air, it can't wash away any potential moisture, and it can cause disease issues. That's something we don't want, because September, October, sometimes into early November, I can still be harvesting tomatoes here in the polycrop. So what the first really basic thing to do is to remove any leaves below the first truss of fruit. If you go around all of your tomatoes and do that, you'll suddenly feel that, oh yeah, there is a lot more airflow. And then I start to work on the leaf above, and then I can look around, and when I feel like maybe there's a few too many leaves, I will remove another batch. It's kind of quite an intuitive feeling, but the main thing is having a clear stem. When this truss finishes, you cut that off, you cut the next leaf off below the next truss, like this. And what you'll actually see is that it opens up underneath and it brings in light. And we can actually capitalize on this by starting to grow other crops underneath the tomatoes. So after going through and just removing all of the leaves below the first truss of fruit, you can see very quickly how much space this has opened up underneath, and it's created quite a nice dapple shade effect. The trick about growing foods undercover is about timing. You don't want to start things off too early when it might still be a bit hot and it can cause things to run to seed. So things like lettuce or pakchoi, I'll actually either transplant or direct sow from about mid-September to late September. However, there's a few things that I've got of spare seedlings, like basil, this is Chinese cabbage here, and also some kohlrabi, which I can actually put in straight away. And don't worry if you don't have seedlings, you can direct sow them instead. This year, because it's been so dry, there's been a few things we've had to change. Installing this Gardena soaker hose has been a big help. But we've also been combining that with grass clippings to use as a mulch. And we've put down around 3 or 4 applications of fresh grass clippings over this growing season. And what it's actually created is, I think, the best quality soil mix that we've had in this polycrop. It is so rich, it's so dark and fibrous, and it's got a good moisture content to it. So this is something that I'm actually going to be doing every year in all of the undercover growing spaces, is not being afraid to mulch with grass clippings, because I can see now I've got this amazing, rich, full of life growing medium. Whereas in previous years, even with trying to keep up with watering, I would always feel towards the end of the year that the soil was like quite dry and dusty and didn't have much life, and I was like thinking polytunnels need so much compost. But now I'm not worried. This, combined with a bit of compost, which I will be using, alongside good watering and homemade DIY natural amendments, I think is a nice winning formula for success of undercover growing. My plan today is to move the grass clippings either side to kind of create square blocks around the base of each of these tomato plants, and then I've got this more open bit of ground where I'll be transplanting some seedlings. I'm going to put a little bit of a handful below each seedling, but you'll see that I'll have a bit of a grid section. The reason why I'm doing a grid section is just because it's easier to manage. I can keep in track how many plants I put between each tomato plant, for example, and I'm also ensuring that the seedlings will get optimum light now that this area below has opened up quite a bit. View from the future here. You can see how the grid pattern is planted up nicely, mainly of kohlrabi, basil, beetroot and Chinese cabbage. What I'm going to do is give them a water now, and then the idea is when the tomato plants are removed, I'll then just plant up the rest of these block squares. However, if I can get things in sooner using this grid pattern, you can. September is a bit of a bittersweet month for me because in terms of sowing for the outside, it basically grinds to a bit of a halt compared to some like radishes or green manures. But it's kind of starting up for polytunnel growing. So I've actually, just to make it easy, I've got a list in the video description of, if you're in kind of zone 7, 8 or 9, the things to sow in September to then continue growing undercover over winter, where even though over like January and February there isn't much growth at all, you can still harvest and the plants are ready for that warmer temperatures towards the end of February and March when the sunlight starts to increase to continue growing and feed you throughout a lot of the hungry gap. If you don't have, say, a polytunnel or a greenhouse, you can actually use cold frames in the exact same way. So here's one of the cold frames that I designed that's available on our shop. And I'm growing carrots in here they're a bit of a Paris market carrot, so we can hopefully get some small roots around Christmas time, which would be nice. But this actual 4x4 foot square would be ideal for growing a bunch of winter salads. So what you could do if you wanted, if you're a bit unsure, is you could actually start off a load of things in modules, grow them in a cold frame and then transplant them in them when you know that you have good germination. But it's a real simple way of being able to create that really precious undercover growing space, which is the highest valued space in any garden. If you don't have the space, you can still use something like a cold frame to get the same benefits that anyone who has a polytunnel can enjoy as well. If you watch this channel, you know that I follow no dig principles, and it's the exact same whether it's in a polytunnel or outside. One of the questions that you might have though is, when do I put down that mulch of compost? So for me, the best time in a polytunnel is either around September, October, where I've got that crop crossover regarding tomatoes, because usually when I'm transplanting tomatoes, I don't need to put down extra compost. I just put a load at the base of the transplanting hole. But if you can't do it over September, October, or you haven't got any compost ready, around January, February, March, just mulching around the plants is another really good time to do it. One of the mistakes that I've just repeated too often in the past is, when it is time for the tomatoes to come out, is not growing anything, even just say a crop of field beans or some peas for pea shoots, because plants send out around 10 to 40% of the carbon molecules that they make during photosynthesis out through the roots to feed the soil life. When you remove plants from the equation, that soil life isn't being fed for potentially 4, 5, 6 months of the year. So even if you're just growing a bit of a salad crop or something that you can just take out a bit later on, it's going to massively benefit the health of your soil and in turn improve the yields for the following year when you are growing your exciting summer crops like those courgettes. No, courgettes aren't exciting. Well, depends, but like those cucumbers or sweet corn or anything else like tomatoes and aubergines. Now there is one absolutely amazing undercover growing tip for winter that you can either do in a polytunnel greenhouse or in a cold frame, and I tried it for the first time last year. It worked so well. What you do, like this chard, is you transplant some of your crops from your garden outside undercover and then grow it through winter, and it turns into this amazing jungle. It is so easy to do, it's so effective, it gives you a lot of food, and this video will show you exactly how to benefit from this amazing tip.